Censorship is a complex web spanning social media giants and governments that affects us all. History has shown moments where rebels and activists use social media as a weapon for human rights. But what if the truth was silenced before it could ever surface? Daily, platforms block and delete thousands of social media accounts. Until now, this power has rested solely in the hands of the corporate giants. But imagine another scenario. Your own government has taken the reins. Worse, they've created a separate, unaccountable organisation with unchecked internet dominance. In 2022, New Zealand's then Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern's office contacted Facebook through a third party to censor my online work, which involved questioning her government decisions on COVID. Despite my work receiving more shares than Ardern and the state-sponsored media, it was targeted for censorship by her cabinet. However, today's discussion goes beyond a social platform's content takedown due to a Prime Minister's office request. What we are going to show you is far more ominous. On June the 1st this year, the Department of Internal Affairs released a consultation document. These documents envision an unelected internet regulator with unrestricted power to remove content targeting a New Zealand audience. Imagine running a website, voicing your opinions against the government. As your audience grows, this proposed regulator could label your site a platform and demand content removal under the threat of massive fines. The DIA's public consultation page links you to a YouTube video discussing the bill. Remarkably, the comments on the video are disabled. There are two reports that form the bill's foundation, an international report and a domestically focused report. From July to November of 2021 was Part 1, the International Regulatory Frameworks for Online Content. In this report, the authors talk about the New World Information and Communication Order, also known as the NWICO, a concept discussed in the 70s and 80s during the Cold War era. The idea was to reduce the dominance of a few powerful players and give others an equal chance to share their stories and ideas. You seeing the irony? They make an argument that the alignment of government and corporations behind the Christchurch coup are very different to the Cold War context in which NWICO played out. I would argue that one terrible shooting does not justify government and corporations colluding to censor its own citizens. From June 2021 to September 2022 came the domestic report, which is significantly more concerning. The report spouses far-left talking points, such as raising concern around conservative family ideals, around family and family structure. At no stage does the report look into left or left-wing extremism. In the domestic report, they heavily reference the Disinformation Project, a now infamous group that includes experts such as a citizen journalist from Sri Lanka. If you look into the work of the Disinformation Project, you will see no mention either into their research of left-wing extremism. This could be because the project is headed up by a self-proclaimed left-wing Marxist. The project was funded for a while directly out of Jacinda Ardern's cabinet. So they were government funded while pretending to be independent and are now setting a baseline for a nationwide unelected internet regulator. A precedent for internet censorship dates back to China's Great Firewall in the late 1990s and early 2000s. This aimed to block access to foreign websites and content deemed politically sensitive or against the government's interests. This is the foundation of democracy. Historically, those in favour of censorship have never ended up as the heroes. We're looking at you, Venezuela. But New Zealand is not the only country dealing with a government that wants to control what its citizens say. Enter the European Union, the United Kingdom, Brazil, Australia, and Canada. Remember when the New Zealand Disinformation Project spokesperson said that they thought New Zealand was facing international influence? Well, Canada also has their own disinformation project under the same name, and it's also funded directly from their government through the Digital Citizens Initiative, which has helped to push through Bill C-11. It seems like these groups are hypocrites. Even Australia has introduced a combating misinformation and disinformation bill. However, a Liberal Party minister said this bill gives the Australian Media Authority extraordinary powers. It would lead to digital companies self-censoring the legitimately held views of Australians to avoid the risk of massive fines. His main concerns are the definition of misinformation is so broad that it could capture statements made by Australians in political debates. Authorised content by the current Albanese government can't be misinformation, but criticisms of the Albanese government by ordinary Australians could be misinformation. Nothing an academic says can be misinformation, but statements by somebody disagreeing with an academic can be misinformation. If the minister favours a digital platform, then that platform could be entirely removed from the application of the misinformation laws. For example, if a country's government-funded Disinformation Project had its own platform and they were putting forward disinformation, they could be made exempt under this Australian legislation. The bill also provides huge penalties against individuals and platforms. Brazil has also introduced their own fake news legislation, Bill 2630. Brazil ranked third in the world for social media use. The bill has the backing of left-wing President Lula da Silva. The same president was formerly in jail due to corruption charges, and during his recent presidential win was subject to mass protests calling his win fraudulent. One Brazilian think tank was so concerned that this bill explicitly exempted members of parliament from any charges, saying the measure would give politicians a free pass to spread fake news and disinformation online in the name of parliamentary immunity. The EU has introduced their own legislation titled the Digital Services Act, which forces platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube to moderate the content they host either in the field of e-commerce or disinformation. All of these countries are following in lockstep together. But why? Well, the United Nations and the World Economic Forum are all calling for mass internet regulation. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, has called for coordinated international action to make the digital space safer and more inclusive. They say this is going to be part of the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the building blocks of the United Nations Agenda 2030. Something Ashley Bloomfield is giving a speech about in Wellington just next month. Of course, there are always ways around some of these objectives, like VPNs, which are virtual private networks, which allow you to ping from a different country than the one you're actually in. So if you were, for example, here in New Zealand and trying to access a website in America that the government had banned, you could use a VPN and ping as being in America and then still access that same website. Kind of like a digital teleportation device for your computer. But there's a great book by the name of 1984, written by a man who could see well beyond the limitations of an average citizen. His name was George Orwell. The premise of his book is that the party maintains control through the thought police and continual surveillance. The society depicted in 1984 is under the rule of a totalitarian government that controls all aspects of people's lives, including their thoughts, emotions, and actions. As much as internet regulation may be drafted with good intentions, we all need to be more like George Orwell, looking past what is happening right now to the dangers of what the future will hold if we allow the government to regulate our every move and each and every piece of information that we see online. Just as media can be a beacon of truth, it can also be a double-edged sword, capable of manipulation and mass propaganda. Thank you for joining me today. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date on future thought-provoking content.